Let me just do a quick introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. We are joining the Social Sciences first panel, and this panel will be moderated by Dr. Kamalini. So let me hand the floor over. Thank you. Over to you, Prof.
Hi, everyone. Hello, my name is Kamalini Ramdas, and I'm from the Department of Geography at the National University of Singapore. I'll be facilitating today's discussion. My panelists today are from three departments other than geography. They are from sociology, communications and new media, and political science. And we're going to be talking about interdisciplinary issues to do with social matters in Singapore, right? So interdisciplinary conversations on social issues, that's what we're broadly dealing with today. I think we're going to start off by, first of all, inviting my colleagues to introduce themselves. And maybe what I'd like to do is tell us who you are, right? And maybe tell us a little bit about your discipline, right? What you're interested in. Sorry, I can hear some background noise. It sounds like a child. I'm really great that we have a, thank you. There you go. Maybe it's me, I can't multitask.
Start them young, right?
Yeah, everybody's got an opinion about social issues. Here we go. All right. Okay, so let me start that again. Okay, so my name is Kamalini Ramdas, without the young person's voice in the background. And I have with me my colleagues Elaine, George, and Alex, and they're going to tell you a little bit about themselves, their disciplines, and the specific specialization, maybe what they do specifically within their disciplines. And I've given them the task of maybe talking about their discipline in terms of one word or one concept. Okay, so that was the challenge I gave them. So let's start off with Elaine, and then George, and then Alex. Okay, in that order. So Elaine, take it away.
Thanks, Kamal. Hi, everyone. So I'm Elaine from the Department of Political Science here at NUS. And so under the Political Science Department, we also house our Global Studies program. So I'll actually be talking about both our political science as well as global studies major. All right, so let's start talking about political science first. So we've been asked to think of a word or concept that kind of encapsulates something that's essential about the discipline. And when we think about what the study of politics entails, probably one of the most central, if not the central concept, is the concept of power, right? And we can think about power as the capacity to bring about intended effects. And so power is so important in politics because politics is fundamentally social, right? It involves collectives of humans interacting with each other. And we understand that whenever humans interact with each other, there might be conflict because we want different things, but there will also be the possibility of cooperation because we might want the same things. Or we might feel as if we should stick together and cooperate. And power is essential to both. So in conflict situations, who gets their way? If we want cooperation, who gets to set the terms and scope of cooperation? How is cooperation enforced and non-cooperation punished? And we often do have a very negative view of power because we often associate power with coercion, right? Forcing others to do things that they otherwise wouldn't want to do. And there is certainly that element of power politics and that coercive element whenever we study politics. But power is not always a bad thing. So for example, we want our governments to have power so that they can do things like enforce the law. Okay, so I'll try to keep things brief. So I'll just move on to talk about the global studies major. And if people have questions about the subfields in political science and so on, do feel free to ask later, all right? Okay, so political science, one of the key concepts is power. And when we think about global studies, the global studies program it's a different major from political science, although it is housed in the political science department. And the global studies program is a program that focuses on globalization. So we are thinking about how different parts of the world are connected in all these different ways through migration, the movement of people, communication technologies, pandemics, right? Transnational business, forms of international cooperation, and so on. And so we are studying all of these issues through a global perspective. And so you can imagine that these kind of global issues, they involve many aspects of our collective lives, right? And so understanding these issues require us to understand not just the politics, but also economics, culture, right? Geography, technology, and so on. And so our global studies program is multidisciplinary. So students are able to take modules across FASS, the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. And so they take modules in not just political science, but history, economics, geography, and so on. And these are then recognized as contributing towards our global studies major requirements. Okay, and so when we think about, okay, so I'm going to say a bit about my own teaching and research interests, all right? So I actually study international relations, and I also study African politics. And very broadly speaking, I am interested in how powerful actors have shaped our international system, but also in how actors that do not seem to have as much power, they've nevertheless found ways to influence the structure of international politics in profound ways. So for example, when we look at Africa's international relations, right, in our classes on African politics, we often discuss how seemingly weaker African states are sometimes able to gain the upper hand in negotiations with more powerful actors like the United States or the European Union or China. And so we look at the strategies, the tactics that they adopt to gain that kind of leverage, to be able to influence outcomes. I have teach another course on the legacies of colonialism. And then we discuss not only how powerful European colonizers shaped the modern world, but also how colonized people's struggles for greater equality and respect for their rights led to the emergence of the rules and norms of our international system today, such as respect for human rights and respect for state sovereignty, right? So here we are all thinking about power and the exercise of power, who gets to exercise power and who gets to exercise power rightfully. And of course, we're also thinking about issues in a very global way. All right, so I'm going to end this here and hand this over to somebody else.
So this is like a challenge for academics. Okay, so I'm gonna give you guys like a 1 minute warning. Okay, so 1 minute. All right, Elaine got off easy. Okay, so the rest of you guys, 1 minute. Okay, one word, 1 minute. Let's go. Okay.
All right, well, I have to follow that excellent intro by Dr. Elaine. My name is Dr. George Radics, and I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Sociology. Dr. Elaine was able to very succinctly give you one word, so now I have to think of that one word for my department, and I would say community. Sociology is the scientific study of society. And the word community has a very long and rich history in terms of how do we define what a community is. What we do in sociology is we put the individual at the center of social relations. And we use scientific methods to try and understand how the individual fits within this society, within this community. We try to uncover these hidden rules that exist all around us that sometimes we take for granted. So one of the questions that Dr. Kamal asked was, what are some of the misconceptions of our discipline? And I think one of the misconceptions is that sociology is commonsensical. If anything, our job is to try and understand why we think of things commonsensibly, right? And what is the problem with some of these issues? Talking about my own special focus, I am trained as a sociologist and a lawyer. So my courses and my research area is about rights, justice. I focus on minorities, sexual minorities, human rights, these types of classes. My teaching is mainly in the area of sociology of deviance, law and justice, and law and society. So if you have any questions on any of these areas, please feel free to reach out. And I see some great questions in the Q&A. So as soon as we get to them, I can answer them, particularly about anthropology and the difference between political science and sociology.
Okay, next up, Alex.
Great, thank you, George. I mean, that was another hard act to follow. So one word. I'm Alex. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Communication and New Media. So I had a bit more time to think about that one word. So I'd say the one word is messaging. So communication is all about how do you get a message from one person to another, a message being some idea that you have in your head and you need to convey to someone else. So I'm trying to communicate to you what is CNM all about. And it's not just interpersonal. So we think about people, how people communicate with each other. We think about how organizations communicate with the public, how governments communicate with the public, with each other, how corporations try to get their message across so that you will buy what they're trying to sell, how governments try and convince people to do the right thing, such as getting vaccinated during COVID. So we think about that, but we also think about, that's the communication part of CNM. The new media is how that communication takes place and is impacted by new media, by things like the internet, by things like WhatsApp, TikTok, Zoom that we're looking through, I mean, or Facebook, however you're watching this. So what happens when you start to communicate through technology? How can we think about that? How do we understand it? And also, how do we design for it? So we think about things from a social science sort of studying what's happening perspective, but we also think about things from a making things perspective. So thinking about, if I'm designing a new video conferencing platform, what would I learn from Zoom? What would I do differently? How would I make it so that communication is more effective? So my particular interest, I teach in the media design part of the department. So I'm interested in UX design, so designing user experiences, and also games. So I do a lot of work designing games, but also understanding what games are, how playful experiences can be part of our lives, and how we can use that to perhaps help people to reflect upon their experiences. So that should be roughly a minute. So I'm going to stop there and pass back to Kamal.
Hi everyone. So it's my turn now. I have to follow the sort of the rules of the game, right? Which I set up myself. So I'm a geographer. So I guess the word I would use rather than space would be spatiality. All right. So what does that mean? Spatiality. It is the belief that space is constantly being produced and made, right? So maybe for some of you, your understanding of geography is that, oh, it's the study of the earth. It is that. It's a study of space. It is that. But we want to take it a little bit further and talk about space as something that is constantly being made, right? And it is being made in different ways. One is through physical sort of processes, right? So stuff that you study in high school about geomorphology, coastal management, coastal sort of processes, right? Volcanoes, all those kinds of things. Plus, we also want to look at two other perhaps ways in which we can think about space. The first is discursivity. That means, what is the discourse around space? How are people sort of understanding space? And the third is around the symbolism or the meaning of space, right? So once we start looking at space in more than just physical, meaning natural processes as well as the built environment, we start going into what do these spaces actually mean to people, and how do they come to mean those things to people, right? So many of the modules that we have in geography aren't just about physical geography, right? They range and touch on political geography, economic geography, as well as social and cultural geography. So some of the material that I cover in my class overlap with Elaine, George, and even Alex's work, right? And that's what makes the College of Humanities and Sciences really quite unique in that sense, right? And within FASS, which is part of that college, right, we do a lot of that kind of interdisciplinary work, right? And so that's where we're at today for today's panel, right? So as a feminist geographer in particular, right, my interests are in areas of gender and feminist theory, right? So I look a lot at issues around access. That means what kind of access people have to different parts of the world in terms of how they live, in terms of what are the impacts of urban planning on the ways in which people might live in cities, right? And also, feminist geographers are also interested in some of the sort of natural impacts of climate catastrophe that we see in the world today, how that impacts people differently based on their sort of minority status or certain sort of inequalities that they face. So I guess for me, geographers are maybe looking at what makes geographers unique in a way is that they sort of bridge that space between the physical and sort of physical processes as well as human processes, right? And the example I give my students is this. When I say the word Singapore, you automatically think, number one, of a little red dot. You can locate it on the earth. You can say where it is, right? In Asia, what longitude, latitude, and each of those definitions give it a particular kind of physical characteristic. But more than that, Singapore is also the word Singapore. And that word, when I say it, also conjures up certain types of imaginations of the kind of place Singapore is. So geographers are able to talk about Singapore not just as a physical space in the world with certain sort of physical characteristics, but they're also understanding what the word Singapore actually means in Singapore, in Asia, and in the world, right? So that's my understanding of what my discipline is. And as a feminist geographer, I'm very interested in how maybe some of our identities and how we occupy space in the world that might influence how we understand the places we live in and what kind of experience we have in that space. All right, we're moving on now to the issue of misconceptions, right? So I think George talked about the misconception, and I kind of mentioned the misconceptions, like people often think of geography as the study of rocks or the earth more specifically, so only the sciencey stuff, but it's not that. So I'm going to give Elaine and Alex a chance to say what is the common misconception about your discipline.
Elaine, you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I guess over the years, actually doing previously face-to-face open house and doing Zoom open house the last couple of years, this is the sort of question that I often get, which I think is the main misconception. There's two. One is that communications and new media is a very theoretical department, that we just think about theories to do with how people communicate. And I think that's actually very much not the case. So a lot of what we do in CNM is we start from theory, so we have to think about how do we communicate, what have people learned over the years, but we also think about ways to study that. So we go out and we talk to people, we observe people, we run experiments with people to see how they communicate, and we also make stuff. So there's a very hands-on element to this. So we actually have two areas within the department which are very much focused on making things. One is communication management, which is basically a fancy academic name for public relations. So it means like getting a message out to people in the public, and you can't do that without testing out and actually making something. So we have students who design campaigns, they put up social media marketing campaigns, they create posters and videos. We also think about the technology that actually is mediating our communication and how we can change that. So we design games, we design apps, we design websites, which leads me to the second misconception. The second misconception is that CNM is very technical. So I just wanted to clarify, I mean, we are a very interdisciplinary department, but we work with a lot of other people who have the more technical skills. So you may take a couple of modules that involve some programming, but you're not going to be a computer science student. You'll be a communication student within FASS, within CHS. So we learn to communicate with and talk to people who are going to be building the things that we're designing. So we work closely. We have an interdisciplinary minor with computer science, actually, but we don't expect you to be a computer science student. You'll be a CNM student. So that's the second misconception, that we're very technical. So I hope that sort of preempts some of your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. What about you, Elaine?
Oh, okay. Well, two misconceptions as well. The first is that if you do a major in political science, you're going to be a politician of some sort. So my parents thought that, didn't really join politics in the end. So that's one. The second misconception about both political science and global studies, generally from non-majors that I hear a lot, is that why study these things, right? Why not focus on studying Singapore instead of global stuff? Why not focus on things that actually affect our lives, or that we can kind of utilize in our future careers as upstanding citizens? And so that, I think that's a misconception, that politics as well as events in other parts of the world are things that happen out there, right, in isolation from our daily lives, and that if we want to, we can insulate ourselves from them and we can avoid them altogether. And so it's almost as if we think that you can go on to be a teacher, or you can go into business or HR, and whatever it is, you can step outside of politics, right, and never be affected by it. But of course, we know especially from the past few years, right, that we can't ignore what happens elsewhere. We can't ignore politics. We've been talking about this deadly global pandemic, and we found that no matter how well we manage things within Singapore, right, events that happen in other parts of the world, if other countries' politics or whatever it is does not allow them to manage the pandemic well, it's going to affect our livelihoods as well as our health and safety. Many of you would have watched the events unfolding in Ukraine, right, over the past week. And this is something that should concern all of us. So people are talking about things like food and oil prices going up. But of course, it's not just that. It's about being interested in what's happening, how human lives are impacted, disrupted, or even ended by events like that. It's about the world becoming a more dangerous place for all of us, right? Because we in Singapore know that we are heavily dependent on everyone respecting the territorial integrity of states, everyone accepting that powerful countries should not be allowed to invade their neighbors. And what we see in Ukraine could be understood as a serious challenge to these kind of international understandings that have ensured peace and stability in the past decades. And so what happens in Europe is going to affect Singapore, and we won't be able to escape the consequences of politics as well as of global events. All right, and so I guess what I'm saying is that we live in a political and globalized world, whether we like it or not, and we can't just say, let's ignore all of these things because they're too depressing or too complicated or not important to us, because not all of us will study political science, but I don't think any of us can escape politics. All right, that's me.
That's great. Okay, so what we see here is big P politics and small p politics, right? So the politics of states and government, and also the politics of little people, right? Like what the stuff that George mentioned earlier about communities and everyday life, right? And what Alex is talking about is how some of the technologies that are part of our lives can actually be used in very specific ways to push some of these different types of politics. So what you'll see happening when you come over to FASS is that, you might be taking different modules, you might be majoring in geography or sociology, but you could take modules in other sort of departments and see lots of synergies in the way we talk about things, right? But for each of these disciplines, you'd be going through, like, maybe think of that first word that we gave you, the concept, right? That will be like the holy grail, right? So you'd be going in through that way, and then you'd be like taking other kinds of modules in CHS or at FASS, and then trying to make those connections. So what will be really useful for many of you is getting a sense of, say, a topic like urban development, right? And how might a sociologist look at it, right? How might a political science person look at it, right? How might that be reflected in the ways in which a CNM, the media is presenting these ideas, right? So it's in that spirit that we're moving on to the next part of our discussion, right? We're meant to talk about social issues, but rather than talking about really heavy duty social issues, I thought we'd take a more humorous approach, right? So we're going to start off with the first thematic here, and I suggested this as a geographer. I said, it's the story about the monkey stole my school bag or the monkey took my homework, right? So we all know that story about a young man who went to school, who goes to school somewhere in the western part of Singapore, and who encountered two macaques, right, on his journey home, and lost his school bag and folder, right? So why is this something interesting to me, right? As a geographer, right? Earlier on, I mentioned about, we're talking about the natural environment and human life in Singapore, right? So for me, this was a great way to think about human-animal relations, right? And what does that mean, right? What happens to Singapore as we develop it, as we become more urbanized? And in Singapore, one of the key words we like to see is livability, right? So livability for whom, right? So as we make Singapore more and more livable, geographers are saying, what about the otters? What about the monkeys? Like, what is our relationship to them, right? What does it mean to plan livable cities where we take a less anthropocentric approach? Meaning, we don't put human beings in the middle of the equation, but we start thinking about our relationship to non-human entities, right? What would that be like? So I'd like to start us off by asking George this question first, because he said it was about communities and people. So what's the sociologist stand on less anthropocentric approach to understanding, the way we live?
That's a tough question. I was going to answer the other one, but I can do this one. Well, sociology really is about putting human beings at the center of our understanding of our society, of our community. And of course, the definition of community can be defined broadly at the national level, at the international level, or even at the family level. And when we define what this community is, many times we have to acknowledge that there are other actors within this community that don't happen to be human beings. They can be animals, they can be spirits. We've had sociologists who talk about relationships with the other world. Religion is a big part of sociology as well, understanding people's philosophical connection to the planet. And so even if sociology does focus on human beings, we are still situated within a social context, and that social context includes nature, animals, spirits. And so that's not necessarily the area that I work on, but it is an area that many of my colleagues work on and do fantastic work on. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it does, George. Thanks so much. Elaine, I want to ask you to maybe reflect a little bit on this same topic, right? And what, we understand political science is maybe a little bit more state-centric or big P focus, right? What is your take on this incident, right? As a political scientist, when you heard about it, right? How would you interpret it, or what's your sort of reading of it?
Okay, thanks, Kamal. Okay, so first of all, I didn't realize that we were supposed to be humorous. Not known for my humor here. Okay, but all right. So when I heard about this incident, when I first heard about this incident, I kind of saw this as representative of competing demands on our government, right? So a big part of the legitimacy of our government, again, not being humorous here, rests on various promises. The promise that Singapore is going to have continued economic growth and development. The promise that our population is going to have easy access to subsidized public housing, which is why rising housing prices have become such a hot button issue. And of course, all of these are important goals to achieve, but there are also other demands. And those other demands, I think, are growing in strength as Singaporeans kind of have become more aware of things like environmental concerns, protecting natural habitats, and so on. And so these wildlife encounters are, of course, the result of the efforts of Singapore to develop, kind of running into the animal inhabitants of our island, of course. And so as a political scientist, we are thinking about, okay, so what's the process of decision making behind whether the government decides to develop a piece of land, right, or cut down a forest in order to build more public housing? Who gets a voice, right? Whose interests are heard? Will public petitions, will the advocacy of civil society groups play a big part in influencing government decisions? And how will the government try to manage these various demands, right? How might the government try to satisfy these various interest groups, and to ensure that the government continues to have the consent of the population to govern in Singapore? So that's kind of my first political science take on the issue.
All right. I'm gonna move on very quickly to our second issue, right? And I'm gonna ask Alex to comment on this, and because it's particular to communications, I think, right? This is the story of, will the real Singaporean chicken curry please stand up, right? So we all saw this thing go viral on the internet, right? About an unfortunate person who worked for the New York Times, or who's representing Singaporean cultural cuisine via the New York Times cooking video app, right? So Alex, tell us a little bit about how you responded to this when you saw this.
Yeah, I think actually both of these there's a very similar thing that to think about initially. How did you find out about it? I mean, for me, I first saw this, I think it was an article by Mothership that was shared on Facebook, right? So I saw this in social media, and that's how I discovered about it. So I think that's a very useful thing, or useful way to think about this. How do we discover something that happened in the New York Times, a New York newspaper about Singapore, but it came across it because it was shared by an alternate media news outlet on social media. And then the second thing I noticed right away was how quickly people responded very critically and often very hostilely to this, and how it spread really fast. So the sort of viral spreading, and also the tendency for people to say exactly what they're thinking without maybe thinking about how it might hurt the other person is often what happens on social media. People tend to not really think so much and just say things, right? So I think this idea of suddenly having this massive backlash was a very, very interesting and relevant thing to the sort of stuff that we think about in CNN. Why did this happen? Would it have been the same if it had been like 30 years ago, if it was a print newspaper that came across my threshold because I happened to subscribe to the New York Times in Singapore? I might discover like 2 weeks later that this thing was happening, whereas it was happening at such a short time frame, like within hours, right? So that was my first thought. The other thought was how people picked up on this and made use of it. I know, I believe SCDF, KFC, I mean, a number of different brands and government agencies made use of this, right? They basically took this Singapore curry and they spun different sort of marketing or advertising or communication strategies around this. I mean, I think the SCDF or MINDEF one was like, you don't want Singapore to end up like that curry, so let's all work together and have total defense, something like that, right? So it was like really smart marketing people latching on to what was happening and just riding with it, right? So I think there's this sort of rapid spread of stuff, both in terms of the negative backlash, but also how people can then make use of it and ride upon it and then use it for their own purposes was fascinating. So yeah, I think this is happening more and more these days.
What's becoming really clear to me, listening to my colleagues, is that we're really, one of the things that we really do well is that we were able to think about issues and make connections between different sort of concepts and ideas, right? So what do you guys think is this what you think makes like students from FASS really marketable when they go out to work, right? So earlier on, there was a question about, well, what if I really want to be a politician? Do I need to take political science? Can I take a geography module and still become a politician? I say, yes, you can. Okay, so the question is, what does your discipline help students to sort of achieve? Like, you know, is there a particular kind of job you think, or do you think actually what we're providing is a little bit more holistic than that, right? So maybe, you know, can you say a little bit about, you know, work opportunities, or even like examples of students, you know, who've gone on to do interesting things that are not really the normal kind of thing that maybe a political science student might do or a sociology major might do? You know, what are some interesting things that your students have done? Anyone can start off. Yeah.
Maybe I can jump in quickly. All my classes are meant to kind of teach students to think flexibly, to develop intellectual curiosity and independent critical thinking skills, which is useful in all professions. And the reality is, with a bachelor's degree, what we're really trying to do is just train you to be effective communicators in terms of writing and in terms of speaking. And so many of my students end up not necessarily being politicians, but many do work for the government in various ministries. If you're interested in the more political side, I had students who went into foreign affairs or home affairs. I have a lot of students who also go into the Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth, or social and family, society and family, I think, and a lot who go into Ministry of Education. But there is a sizable number that go into kind of private industry. We have people, I have students who work for MasterCard, Visa, Muji, big corporations. And it's because we train students in sociology to kind of understand demographic trends. There are four kind of focuses of our department. There's ethnicity, migration, and religion, kind of like the urban issues. That's what I work on. But we also help health planning, policy and analysis, communication, society and culture, and we also have population and family, right? And we train people with different sets of skills. So if you go into population and family, you're going to do a lot of statistics. If you're going to do ethnicity, migration, and religion, you're going to learn how to do focus groups and interviews. And policy analysis, you're going to learn how to read critically and produce research that are appropriate for policy, right? So depending on the track that you take within sociology, it can lead to different types of careers. Yeah.
I'm going to jump in here and also say that I saw something in there like, what can you do other than be a geography teacher? Well, I know I'm not living proof of the possibility of other career paths, right? But I am not just a geography teacher. I want to say I do research in geography, but also before this avatar of myself, I was working for the Economist Intelligence Unit, right? That was my first job after I graduated, okay? So people ask me, why did I leave that and come here? Because I love geography, all right? So, the point I'm trying to make here is that like what George said, many of our students, right, they do end up in the private sector. They don't just become teachers. Not that that's not a good thing. It's a very honorable profession, I want to say, okay? But it's not the only thing that we do, right? So in geography, we have I think one of the things that makes geography kind of interesting is that we offer a minor in geographic information systems, right? So GIS. So that's a particular kind of technical training that we give our students, like Alex, where there's a bit of tech-centered kind of skills that you're going to learn. That's available in geography, and many of our students end up using some of these skills in various sort of jobs in the private sector and public sector, right? So I've currently one honor student of mine who's working at Twitter. We've had people work for Grab, doing things with logistic companies. So really, there's a wide range, right, of things that FASS students can do, okay? I think we have another question. Maybe Alex, do you want to say something about what potentially students can do with CNM?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, a lot of things are very similar across FASS. I think, I mean, it's this idea that we are equipping students to do a wide range of jobs. I can just think about my own sort of ex-students who've gone out there, also in a range of different areas. Some who are maybe interested more in sort of digging into the sort of public relations side of things might end up in marketing companies or in a large company in the marketing department. I have students who, I mean, I have a student who works at Grab, but he does UX design. I have several students who are working at GovTech. They worked on things like Trace Together and stuff like that. So working on like really sort of stuff that we encounter every day, right? But there are also students who've gone on to, I mean, there's one ex-student who did her own startup sort of in the space of role-playing games, actually, for companies, like getting them to do sort of ice-breaking events with games. So it's quite a wide range of things you can do with communication. And it really depends on, I think, what you're interested in, and also maybe how you think about mixing what you're learning with other disciplines within the faculty or within the college, because that's one of the strengths of CHS, that you can take some modules from other disciplines and use that to complement what you really want to do.
I think that's really important. This thing about how you're gonna, the skills that you get here is about making connections between different disciplines. And I can see a question in the chat box here that's quite important, because the person is kind of worried about the fact that the CHS common curriculum is taking up 1/3 of their entire undergraduate program, right? And this can be seen as, well, how do I get to specialize in something if 1/3 of all my modules has to go into something else? So I want to say that I think this is important, right? Because once you have this training, right, this is what is going to allow you to make those kinds of connections, right? So when you come out of FASS or CHS, right, the idea here is that we want to produce or help you, right, to land that job that you want. And in order to land that job, you need to be able to make those kinds of connections. So the way we see it, we're getting excited about the fact that we're going to have students who are actually going to be trained in that sort of core sort of understanding of how to bring things together. And what makes CHS really unique is that the bringing things together is straddling the physical sciences and the humanities and social sciences, right? So I think this is going to be quite an interesting and unique opportunity for our students. And I'm sure that our professors here are also excited about what this might mean for them. So Elaine, can you say something about, what you're excited about in terms of the fact that, we have students who are going to actually be trained in a wide range of things after that core program that they go through? How is that going to impact you in terms of your engagement in the classroom?
Well, it's great because it means that students will be exposed to different disciplinary approaches, and there are all sorts of interesting possibilities in terms of how students can tackle complex social and political issues by kind of combining these approaches, but also having all of this knowledge, right? So you can imagine that a discussion of how voters decide to vote, this discussion could be enriched with perspectives from psychology or neuroscience. We can think about how public policy making in health and environment, right, will benefit from knowledge of biology or pharmaceutical science and so on. And so I wanted to kind of talk about this example that hit the news, I think some time ago, I can't remember when, but this was when Gap released a t-shirt that had the map of China on it, but left out Taiwan, right, from the map. And this led to a lot of backlash, especially in China, and Gap had to kind of take back that t-shirt. And so I would like to think that a graduate of CHS, right, who let's say works for Gap, right, would have kind of maybe had the background knowledge and the awareness to point out that, wait a minute, maybe there we have to rethink the design of this map, because as we all know, maps are also political statements. And so I think that this kind of broad knowledge and awareness of all sorts of social and political issues will benefit our graduates, no matter which career they go into.
George, do you want to jump in here?
Sure. I think that the CHS is still very new, and we're still we have yet to see how the new modules are going to transform our majors, but I think it will transform our majors for the better. I don't think that we should be worried so much about being so specialized and focused, because the reality is, if you're going to go out into the working world nowadays, it is more likely than not that you are going to change jobs over your lifetime more so than previous generations. You're going to be asked to do things that require a broader skill set. And just generally, I think there's more freedom in the job market, where you can come in as a sociologist and down the line decide you want to be a social worker or a lawyer, right? And I think this idea that you have to take courses outside of the major is a good thing. It's encouraging people to think more flexibly, more open-mindedly, to break down the walls of disciplines while still having you based in your own, whether it be sociology, geography, political science, or communications and new media.
Thank you. Right, so I saw a question there about, the concern that if you want to do geography modules and you don't have a physical geography background, are you going to be in disadvantage, right? So I think for most of our disciplines here, right, when we talk about that gateway module, the assumption is no knowledge, right? No knowledge is necessary, meaning everyone is welcome to take a 1101 class in any discipline, and our job is to get you up to speed, right? Now, obviously, if you have done geography, or maybe you have read, and some people read like maybe social theory in their free time, that will put you at an advantageous position, right? In meaning that you would know a little bit more, right? But a lot of this knowledge, this added knowledge, comes in later, right? So at the start, we're going to start off with easier questions, right? And we will be providing you some of that technical background information that you might need. And of course, the really cool thing about being in the university is that your professors who are creating the curriculum that you see in front of them, this is their area of specialization. We keep office hours, meaning you can actually ask your questions privately via email or set up a consultation session with your professor. It's not like high school where your teacher has to deal with 40 other people or 25 other people. We try to be able to respond to you more directly and in a more personal manner, right? So I think that this makes a university education something quite special, right? And I think for CHS, at least my view on this is that really we're trying to create an opportunity for our students to be able to curate their own learning process and to maybe pick something that they're excited about. Because when we're excited about what we're learning, right, we'll gravitate towards it. We'll want to ask the right questions. We'll want to read more about it. So I think CHS is quite unique in the sense that it gives you the opportunity to pick things that seem so disparate and far apart, but you can also pick and decide to specialize and deep dive into some of the modules, right? So the core part, the first sort of third of it, is where the compulsory bit is, and actually 2/3 is up to you what you want to do with it. And I think those are pretty good odds as far as I'm concerned, right? So I know that we have a lot of questions in the chat box, and I'm going to give my colleagues time to look at some of them and see if they can answer some of them. So if you guys see a question there, a last chance, go down the list and pick one question that you'd like to answer before we close for today. For the students who have a whole bunch of questions that maybe we haven't got around to, remember there are many opportunities. There's more coming up. Later on, we'll have there are more sort of sessions planned, including master classes and whatnot coming up ahead in this open house season. And once you get into NUS, right, there's also other kinds of interactions that you will be able to experience after you've gotten in, right? So today we're really trying to get you to understand what CHS is about and what interdisciplinarity is about, all right? So guys, if you want to look quickly at the chat box and tell me when you're ready to answer that question, and just unmute yourself and pick that question.
I think I'm ready to answer a few of the questions that pop out regarding anthropology and sociology. I was furiously trying to answer some of these questions as people were chatting. And I was starting the answer to the difference between sociology and anthropology. This is kind of an old distinction, right? It was a colonial division of labor where the sociologists were looking at the urban centers and the consequences of the Industrial Revolution, whereas the anthropologists were looking at the tribes and the natives that were going to disappear due to modernization. Now we know that these kind of distinctions are outdated. And now these two disciplines are basically doing very similar things, but we cannot deny that historical legacy is still there, where sociologists are going to look more at the urban centers, more at kind of structural policy issues, not all, but some, many. And we do have like a quantitative sociology, which will lead more into the policy direction. Whereas anthropologists are looking more at ethnography, deep cultural dives. And so for the longest time, we were sitting in the same department. And our colleagues are sociologists and anthropologists. And it's only now that we're starting to give recognition to the anthropologists that have been with us since the beginning of our department, which, by the way, is the oldest and most prestigious in Asia. I just wanted to add that. So regardless of whether or not you join sociology or anthropology, being in this department with such a long history, tradition, and with such great colleagues, I think it's a slam dunk. And of course, you're going to figure out what your personality type is and what you're going to gravitate towards, regardless of whether or not it's my department or any other department. But I think the great thing about sociology and anthropology is it gives you choice within our department.
Thanks so much. Very quickly, Alex, do you want to jump in here and pick a question?
I think actually what I'm just going to say is that CNM is on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, and my colleague Yufan dropped some details into the chat there because we are running out of time. But please do contact us. If you have any questions, you can find my email on the CNM website. You can contact the department. We'd love to talk to you, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks, Alex. Elaine, very quickly.
So thanks for your questions. I'm afraid we couldn't get to all of you guys, but of course, do check out the Department of Political Science and the Global Studies Program websites for more information. And of course, we do have contact information on those websites if you want to find out more. All right, that's it for me.
I'm going to pick up the question there about urban studies and GIS. I see a lot of questions around urban planning and whatnot, right? So I'm going to say at the Department of Geography, right, we are basically, we have a 1101, which is a gateway module that gives you an introduction to sort of some of the basic concepts and ideas in physical and human geography. But then we move on into a second year sort of curriculum where you will get an introduction to GIS, Earth system science, social and cultural geography, political and economic geography. So I think what makes geography interesting is that if you are someone who's sort of kind of like physical science interest, but you also like social science, we're one of those modules that you get to kind of engage in both of those kinds of ways of thinking, right? So I have colleagues who work in labs who are doing experiments with chemicals and doing, like, digging out in the field, right? And then there are people like me who do more research in archives and interviewing people, and perhaps overlapping more with like George's department, right? So geography in that sense is kind of interesting. For GIS and urban studies, we have minors in these programs. So geography has got 4 minor programs, and I've given our website there, so you can definitely check that out. And of course, all of my colleagues here said, do get in touch with us, right? So if you go to the website and you check out the website and you see something interesting and you have a question about it, get in touch with us, right? You can write to any one of us or even to the admin person at geography, but don't be afraid to get in touch with any one of us, like the 4 of us here. I'm speaking for you guys, but I'm saying I know you guys are really open and friendly, and I'm quite sure you will answer those questions, right? So check out the website, see what's out there, and if you have a specific question that you feel hasn't been answered by the website, do get in touch with us, right? And we'll try to help you out.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kamalini, and all our panelists. So for the audience here, we're going to put up a quick poll. We'd like to hear your thoughts as we are planning our April and May outreach activities. While you are kindly completing this, we're just going to flash contact details. So in case you have any questions we have not answered, you can write to us at askchs@nus.edu.sg. Our phone numbers are also there. And just to quickly let you know that the next session is going to start in 10 minutes. And in case you are quite interested in the different majors, we've also pasted the link to our major e-brochures. So you can check out the 4 majors that are being discussed here, as well as the other 17 majors that we have available. So we'll just give you another minute or 2 to complete the poll. Okay, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to end this session about now. Thank you, panelists, for sparing your time from your busy schedule. I know some of you have come from classes, some of you are going to classes. So thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next round. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
All the
everyone.
best in your application.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Feel free to reach out by email if I wasn't able to answer over live or in chat.
Same here. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.